of the wondrous things that you bring to the ones who wait. You fixed your sight on the servant's plight, and my weakness you did not spurn. So from east to west shall my name be blessed. Could the world be about to turn? My heart shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all the tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. Though I am small, my God, my all, you work great things in me, and your mercy will last from the depths of the past, from the end of the age to be. And your very name puts the proud to shame, and to those who would for you yearn, you will show your might, put the strong to flight, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all the tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. From the halls of power to the fortress tower, not a stone will be left on stone. Let the king beware, for your justice tears every tyrant from his throne. The hungry poor shall weep no more, for the food they can never earn. These are tables spread, every mouth be fed, for the world is about to turn. And my heart shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all the tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. Though the nations rage from age to age, we remember who holds us fast. God's mercy must deliver us from the conqueror's crushing grasp. This saving word that our forebears heard is the promise which holds us bound, till the spear and rod can be crushed by God, who is turning the world around. My heart shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all the tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring. Let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away all the tears, for the dawn draws near, and the world is about to turn.
Last Sunday, I went to the Lee Monument here in Richmond, and Black Lives Matter was having a party. It was a celebration of love and Black talent. There was food and community, and I experienced deep kindness from everyone there, making sure that I stayed well hydrated. Names of those that we know of who have lost their lives to police brutality were named aloud. And you can even walk around the monument reading brief narratives of those whose lives were lost. The space and experience was full of complexities and contradictions and confusion. A new context-added Confederate monument, full of graffiti, a party hosted by Black Lives Matter, all at the feet of Robert E. Lee. A monument that represents the glorification of white supremacy and memorializes a treasonous government. My visit on Sunday was filled with God's presence. That doesn't mean that it was easy or perfect or always made sense. It means I felt God's presence and it was powerful. It was like a worship experience that I have never had before. I wanted everyone to experience that same presence and power. And as a matter of fact, this past week, I've been quite evangelical about the entire experience, telling everyone about it and inviting them to come and try to experience the same thing as I did. As someone who doesn't consider herself very evangelical, I have even been surprised of myself. Here in this messy, complicated, reclaimed space, God was present. Messy and complicated is not usually how we associate God's presence. Even in church and worship life, we usually measure God's presence based on growing crowds of people, or our perfectly sung hymns, or a well-delivered sermon, or even a growing offering plate. Not messy and complicated. As a matter of fact, the messier and more complicated the sermon, the more us pastors are bound to hear from some people that didn't actually like God's presence. But God's presence is usually messy. It's in the communion wine that is spilled, and squeaky children's choirs, and babies crying throughout the service. Let us think for a moment about Mary. We are most familiar with Mary as the mother of Jesus. And while we often celebrate and recognize all the good, amazing parts of the story, let us sit for a minute with its complexities. God decides to bring God's self incarnate into the world through an unwed, poor, pregnant teenager. That sounds a little messy. And yet there God is. And there Mary is singing about God's presence. The Song of Mary, known as the Magnificat, celebrates a story that parallels the song of Hannah, the mother of Samuel, that we find in 1 Kings. And God, in this song, takes action in the world on behalf of the powerless, lifting up the lowly, filling the hungry, tearing the mighty from their thrones. And Mary is carrying the child that will usher in a new creation. Why would anyone think that lifting up the lowly and filling the hungry and tearing the mighty from their thrones wouldn't get a little messy? When there are people in power who are getting too comfortable with other people's death, ushering in God's new creation where Black Lives Matter, is going to get a little messy. Those in power like to stay in power, And the idea of the lowly being lifted up is a threatening thought, and it will likely get a little messy. The work of unwrapping ourselves from American godliness and a false sense of national religion is going to be messy. Reconciling the beginnings of this country and the fact that this country was built by slave labor, of which we white people continue to benefit from, is going to be messy. Why would anyone think that lifting up the lowly and filling the hungry and tearing the mighty from their thrones wouldn't get a little messy? And friends of faith, we are invited into this mess. We are invited into God's presence. That is the nature of our faith. Now, marching or protesting may not be your thing, and that's fine. That is one mess, and some are called to that kind of messy work. But another level of work, really important work, the hard, messy work that really needs to be done and which God invites us into, is one of vulnerability. This means relinquishing our ego, practicing deep listening, accepting that we don't have all the answers. And that's actually when things can really get messy, especially if we are the ones sitting high and who are taking all the resources and living like kings. That is deeply uncomfortable and requires us to lean into our faith, to really believe that God will provide. There is nothing more vulnerable than God becoming incarnate as a dark-skinned baby in the world. And that dark-skinned baby was murdered too by those with authority. So if we say we are followers of Jesus, then entering the messiness of our vulnerability is not only the least we can do, it is the most Christ-like thing we can do. We've all been walking down a course that has been dictated by our worldly gods and false idols like power and fear and money and an ethic of scarcity. And here is Jesus, who comes in to turn the world around and upside down with his birth and his death and his work on earth, that encouraged people to turn their lives and move in a different direction, away from those things that we have replaced with God's love. This turning is both one of heart and soul, as well as a physical turning that lives out the words of the prophet Amos, who spoke against disparities when he said, "Let justice roll on like a river and a righteousness like a never-failing stream." Friends, it is time that we turn. We must turn from a system in which we are a part of and complicit in. a system that has been in place for 400 years, one that our ancestors benefited from, and one we continue to benefit from. As followers of Jesus, it is incumbent upon us who believe in Christ to do right by him. Because Jesus is always on the side of injustice. Jesus is always on the side of the oppressed, without exception. And so we ask ourselves, where are we? Are we on the side of justice too? And not just justice for us, not justice that just benefits us, but all of God's children. So as Christians, we must confront our own white supremacy. This includes white supremacy that is within our institutions, such as government, but also institutions like the church, institutions like our symbols and our history. Jesus calls us to bring good news of liberation. And that liberation begins with us freeing ourselves from our own white privilege and superiority and supremacy. First, casting the splinter from our own eye and repenting. It certainly feels that we are in an advent, a birth of something new, an awakening, a shift. I pray that we are heading into God's pit of reconciliation, of truth-telling, and working our way to the other side so that we can meet each other again. And if this is the case, no wonder why we feel God's presence. No wonder why we find ourselves being a bit more evangelical. No wonder why we can't help but proclaim the good news and work for the good news. No wonder why in 20 days of sustained protest, there have been countless cities engaging in police reform and reallocating police budgets. And why charges were upgraded against the 4 officers who murdered George Floyd. And why streets have been repainted and renamed in honor of Black lives. And why Confederate monuments are being removed. And why difficult public and private conversations are happening about race and privilege. And why people all over the world are waking up to their own fight for human rights. No wonder why we feel God's presence. No wonder it is getting a little messy. Because God is always on the side of life.